So here we have just a few photographs that were taken on the commemoration at the monument in Clowndereen with Father Cremen, where we had a small ceremony on the night of the 100th year anniversary. Also here there was some other photographs as well here of some of the younger generation, the O'Mahony brothers, who's on whose farm the shooting happened, and we also have the laying of a reed on the grave, or at the monument, I should say, by Dan Murphy, being his nephew. I just need to admit a few more lads as we're going along. So. And here you have another photograph of the extended Murphy family. Also taken around the monument in Kilburton. Okay, so if we head into the presentation, and as I say, this is about 15 minutes. Compliments of Brian Murphy, and we will then have the poem and maybe just a little bit of discussion after that.
Con Murphy was born on the 8th of May 1896 in the town of Clashflook between Timoleague and Clonakilty, the seventh of 9 children. His parents, Dan and Margaret, were tenant farmers when Con was born, and all of the family would have been involved in farming in Clashflook in their younger days. Dan was a very hard-working and pragmatic man. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and at one stage Dennis, the eldest of the family, decided he would head off to England on his own little adventure, unbeknownst to his parents. When Dan got news of this, he headed off to England after him, and Dennis was brought home, no doubt with the tail between his legs. At the time, immigration to America was also common, and the said Dennis later immigrated to the United States for many years before returning home in later life. Another brother of Con's, John, joined the IRC and was stationed in Limerick from 1910 to 1913. He resigned in 1913 with enough money to immigrate to America also, where he remained until his death. By the time of his 1916 rising, and in the aftermath of the Land League movement, Dan had become the owner of another farm in Carrick, Balmascarthy, which another of Con's older brothers, Sonny, went to farm, while Con continued to farm in Clashflook. In the aftermath of the execution of a number of volunteers involved in the events of the Easter Rising in Dublin, a huge groundswell of sympathy swept through the country, and the nationalist movement began to gather momentum. This was no different in West Cork, where Con, his younger brother Bat, and Sonny all got involved with the volunteers. In a newspaper clipping from 1916, we can see that Con is part of the Timoleague branch of the Gaelic League. The purpose of the meeting was to organise an upcoming concert, and the article articulates the hope that local Gaels will contribute to the entertainment. It was in relation to a similar event in 1918 that Conn found himself at the attention of the authorities. As World War One came to an end, the British introduced conscription into Ireland. There were widespread protests against conscription, so much so that the authorities introduced a ban on large gatherings. In the summer of 1918, the Timleague branch of Sinn Féin had planned to organise a feis in Timleague. Upon being warned that such gathering was now legal, the feis was moved to Barrow on the 28th of July. The British had assembled a military troop in Timleague on that day in the belief that the feis was still planned for Timleague, but later in the day they learnt of the gathering in Listlvan, opposite the Catholic Church. When the troops initially arrived on the scene, they were treated with indifference, with some shouting, "Up the rebels!" There was flying of tricolours and jeering of the troops. The atmosphere soon soured as the British troops, with bayonets fixed, fired warning shots into the air. The crowd was then charged by the troops, resulting in many people taking refuge in the local church. As a result of the feis, Conn was arrested and was charged. At a subsequent sitting of Bandon Courthouse, 3 out of the 7 charged refused bail. When Conn was asked if he had anything to say in his defence, he stated, "As a soldier of the Irish Republic, I refuse to recognise this court." Conn was sentenced to 2 months' hard labour in Crumlin Road Jail in Belfast. Conn served his time in Belfast and was released on the 14th September 1918. It must be noted how much extra work Conn's parents, farm workers and neighbours would have had to carry out at times like these to continue keeping things going at home. Conn's 2 sisters, Catherine and Mary, would have been amongst those working at home at the time with Conn's parents. Catherine was also a member of Cumann na mBan. Members of the Cumann were often tasked with the transportation of arms. This proved an invaluable asset in the Republican effort, as they were mostly able to get through British checkpoints without searches being conducted. On this slide you will see Catherine's Cumann na mBan volunteer medal. Catherine later in life settled in Ballymore, Kilbrittain, marrying Batty Deneen, while Mary married Charles Walsh of Tullamurray, Ballinascarthy. Conn's second oldest brother, Tim, was not as lucky when it came to avoiding the rough hand of the British. On one occasion, when soldiers called Clashflook, Tim was the victim of a severe beating and left him with injuries which affected him for the rest of his life, very much inhibiting his ability to farm. Conn and Bat were in different IRA companies, Conn first joining the Timleague branch, while Bat later became a member of the Clonakilty branch. Excerpts from Bat's diaries of activities at that time show how active they were, with weekly meetings and parades at various locations, many times within the farmyards of people sympathetic to the cause. Bat was battalion adjutant for the 3rd West Cork Brigade, responsible for keeping records of various company details and ensuring volunteers had sufficient supplies of arms. In one of Bat's diary entries, we see the listing of a Mick Coleman as captain of the Barrow branch. Mick would be involved in many of the same operations as Conn and Bat at various stages in the 1920 to 21 time period. Mick had joined the volunteers around the same time as Conn and Bat. He was involved in many operations around the Cork-McSherry and Timleague areas in 1920. He was also involved in attacks in Bandon, Turin, Burghetia House in Rosscarbery, where Bat Murphy was also involved, and Crossbarry, where Con was involved as the struggle went on. Owing to its coastal location, some of the Barry Road team also had some close escapes crossing Cormac-Sherry Bay by boat, as travelling by road was often too dangerous. Mick also narrowly avoided capture on a few occasions in early 1921 as the British began rounding up volunteers in the West Cork area and imprisoning them. Con was tasked as a bomb maker and was involved in many military operations, including attacks on the barracks in Timoleague, Kilbrittain, Inishannon, and Rosscarbery. As the War of Independence got more active, both Con and Bat would have had to live life on the move quite a lot. This was the only way to stay ahead of the British Armed Forces, lodging overnight in safe houses of sympathisers before moving on again. Con was also involved in the famous Battle of Crossbarry, where Lieutenant Charlie Hurley, as well as many others, including Con Daly, lost their lives. Con attended Charlie's funeral in the middle of the night at Clegok Graveyard. Of course, there were as many failed attacks as there were successes. One such incident occurred in Cormac-Sherry, where 5 volunteers from the Timoleague branch, including Con, failed in an attempt to apprehend a suspected spy. The local RIC accompanying the man to and from the local church to protect him. Around this time, a raid took place on Sonny's house in Carrick. During a search of the house, the British forces found a postcard which had roguishly been signed off by the sender, "Hope you're enjoying the run." This was reason enough for the British to arrest Sonny and intern him to Ballykinler prison in County Antrim. From the period of February to April 1921, there were several executions of IRA men by the British. Tom Barry and his compatriots had first considered a daring raid on Cork Prison to help some of the IRA inmates escape, but this was considered too risky. Instead, it was decided to launch simultaneous attacks on 10 garrisons between Inishannon and Castletownbere on May 14th. In preparation for this, there was a meeting of the 1st Battalion Council scheduled for O'Neill's of Kilbrittain. While making his way to the meeting, Con stopped off at the Hayes house in Castleview, where he had supper with his good friend James Hayes, who was also a member of the Timoleague IRA. James walked with Con for a while before leaving to continue his journey to Kilbrittain. The meeting at O'Neill's went on well into the night, and many of those attending stayed the night at O'Neill's. Con, Mick Coleman, and Dave Sullivan left O'Neill's early on the morning of the 11th of May and called to O'Mahony's of Clowndereen. The group were inquiring from Mrs. O'Mahony whether there was any news of a British column who they knew had stayed at Clegok National School the night before. Suddenly, that same column entered the yard and started to close in on the 3 men. Con Murphy and David Sullivan made a run for it out of the yard, while Mick Coleman slipped unnoticed under a horse cart and curled up his legs not to be noticed. Mick could hear the soldiers chasing Con and David out of the yard and pursuing them, shots being fired. After a while, the troops withdrew and Mick got out of the hiding place and headed off in the direction in which he knew Murphy and O'Sullivan had gone. Around 150 yards from the yard, he came across the body of Con Murphy. As he examined Con, Mick heard another party of the column enter Mahony's yard, and Mick had to move on again. The British got a pony and used the cart which Mick Coleman had been hiding behind to take Con's body away. They forced John O'Mahony, who was over 70 years of age, to drive the pony and trap along with Con's body. The soldiers had mistakenly thought they had shot John's son. The next day, Con's father had heard that Con had been shot and made his way to Bandon to see if he could confirm the news. When in Bandon, he saw a pony and trap going through the town, carrying a covered body in the back, legs hanging out of the back of the cart. Con's father knew it was Con, as he had done some repairs to Con's boots some weeks previously, and he could see the same boots on the body. Con's father immediately left Bandon for fear of being recognised and headed home to Clashflook with the terrible news. On the 12th of May, another volunteer, Frank Hurley, was being buried in Kilbrogan. The men who were guarding Con's body in Bandon Workhouse were instructed to go to the funeral, as there was expected to be trouble. While they were at the funeral, Mary O'Mahony and Rick O'Regan smuggled Con's body out of the workhouse. They put the coffin on a horse and cart and then covered it with bags of bran. Mary and Rick then drove the horse and cart out of Bandon town unnoticed. Con was buried in the middle of the night in Clegok graveyard, in almost identical circumstances to Charlie Hurley weeks earlier. News of Con's death reached his brother Sonny, while he was still interred in Ballykindler prison. Some of his fellow inmates created a memorial to Con, which can be seen here in this slide. Around this time, the tide of nationalist effort was beginning to turn. Some days after Con's death, his brother Bat rode a horse through Clonakilty, fully armed, but was not apprehended. A bold act, no doubt to be seen as an act of defiance soon after his brother's death. Bat's wife Fanny was also involved in Cumann na mBan. On one occasion, when the military raided the house in search of arms, Fanny kept a cool head and let the troops search the house, while all the time hiding a gun underneath her dress. Bat, like so many in later years, spoke very little of the War of Independence. No doubt the loss of Con in the very latter stages of the war, along with the great tragedy of the civil war that followed, caused much hurt. The frugal nature of successive governments' attitude to the volunteers' pension was a source of frustration for Bat. It was such a shame that people who did so much for the foundation of the state were treated in such a way for decades afterwards. Bat and Fanny went on to have 3 children in later life, Dan, Margaret and John. Mick Coleman and Sonny Murphy also went on to have family. 2 of Mick's children, Margaret and Johnny, got married to 2 of Sonny's children, Dan and Mary. No doubt there were a lot of memories, both happy and sad, shared between both families on the occasion of these marriages. On one of these occasions, at which Mick was present, the wedding reception was held at the hotel in Cork-MacSherry, one of the very establishments which Mick would have forced some unplanned renovations on during the War of Independence. The Murphy family would like to use this opportunity to extend a huge thanks to the O'Mahony family of Clownderee and others from the Kilbrittain area for the maintenance and upkeep of the memorial to Con. We'd also like to thank those who attended the recent anniversary commemoration. Finally, I'd like to thank Kate Crowley Kappa, who is married to a grandson of Catherine Murphy, and Tim Crowley Castleview, whose recently published article and video on Con Murphy has formed the basis for a lot of the information in this evening's presentation. I'd also like to acknowledge their work for a new memorial to Con Daly and Con Murphy in Ballinascarthy village, which they hope to have unveiled later this year.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Again, a very, very detailed presentation, which you come to the finer details of of each action makes it feel very, very real. So thank you very much for presenting that. I know Con, a group of you reenacted the walk recently. Do you want to comment on that, Con?
Yes, Sean, thanks very much. First of all, compliments there to Brian on a fantastic presentation. Very well put together, Brian. And as Brian mentioned there, on the night before Con Murphy's death, that was on the night of the 10th of May, 1921, Con Murphy had his last meal in the home of James Hayes, a bus in the townland of Ballinroher, not too far from his own home place. So a walk, a centenary commemoration walk was organised by Tim Crowley and a few others on the night of the 10th of May now this year on the 100th anniversary. And we called to the home of James Hayes, which is now Jerry O'Leary and Tom O'Leary's home in Ballinroher. Many people know this Castle View. And we walked, I suppose, the approximately 15 kilometres from the starting point near Con Murphy's farm over to Clondereen and on to the O'Neills in Marlborough. I suppose it's true to say it was an honour to take part in that walk that night, and I know there were some members of the Murphy families, including Kate, and a number of members of Kilbrittain Historical Society and other interested people involved in that walk. It was an honour to take part in the walk, and I think a huge thanks has to go to the O'Leary family and to Tim Crowley for organising it. Just one comment there on the monument in Clondereen. I suppose the monument was built around, we think, around in the early 20s. The original cross there would have been made up in Palmagras Forge in the Marsh in Cork City. And the brass plate was put on it, which would have been in Irish. About 18 years ago, a local committee then under the chairmanship of Pat O'Neill in Kilbrittain modernised the monument, leaving the original one intact, but building a stone wall around it to make it more visible to passing motors, because people would pass that road at 40, 50 miles an hour and maybe more. Some of the stone that was involved, Sean, came from the home place of Con Murphy in Ballinroher. Densham and Vale supplied the stone there. Some of it came from the Deneen, which is now Hurley home farm in Ballymore, where Con Murphy's sister was married. Some of the stone also came from Murt and Michael O'Sullivan's mother's home place in Cunnapog. And the remainder of the stone came from Michael Fielding in Kilbrittain. And all that work was done voluntarily by Packie O'Neill. So, and Finbar O'Many and Packie O'Neill were the main driving force behind that. And Michael Coleman, who's here tonight, was the secretary of that group. So I think that monument will stand the test of time and will remain there for a long, long time. So thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Con. Yeah, and indeed it is certainly for a lot of the younger generation passing by, and to see a monument so well kept, it gets their attention, and you know, they certainly want to find out a little bit more about it, and that's credit to the monument committee that set about that. Can I call in Dennis O'Brien there? I know, Dennis, you have written quite a bit as well about some of the activities of the locals, including Con. Would you like to add anything to what you've heard this evening?
Yeah, Sean, as Brian kind of alluded earlier, like he took part in a lot of attacks on RC barracks, including like Timleague, Inishannon, Kilbrittain, Bannon Barracks, where Daniel Riley was killed. And he also took part in, I think, the destruction of Cormacsherry RC Barracks, which is only a few hundred yards from the Cormacsherry Hotel, and he was involved in the burning of the hotel as well. It appears that he was kind of heavily involved in the destruction of roads and bridges at the time. And some of these would have been like Vinci Bridge, Timleague Bridge, Kilmaluda Bridge was another one, and also Ballycatton Bridge on the main Timleague Bandon Road. And he was involved as well in a few abortive ambushes on trains at the time, which didn't come off. But it seems like he was a a man for kind of heavy work at the time. So he was heavily involved in that. And of course, his finest hour was probably across Barry. And again, like he was in the Guard of Honor for Charlie Hurley's funeral. And it's a bit of a sad irony that he was buried there himself in front of Charlie only 2 months later. Like, so, you know, he definitely accomplished a lot during the War of Independence, what I've read on him.
Thank you, Dennis. Can I ask if anybody else would like to come in on the family side, or any other comments from anybody on it, please? I just think it's ironic of our 4 meetings. The whole issue of pensions have come up in each one of them, and the treatment of people when it came to pensions. And I just see at the end of your presentation, Brian, it was a sore issue as well for Beth and some of the family as well, which is, you know, it's sad to see that coming through each one of our presentations, that they seem to have been a very big issue that wasn't properly addressed by the state after. Anybody have any comment on it? Okay. Well, look, again, thank you very much, Brian. And I know the Murphy family have put a lot of work into this, and I've certainly exchanged quite a few emails with Brian and with Kate Crowley as well. And I know that they have extended family viewing tonight from the States and places like that. So I hope, you know, the presentation that you've seen there is a fitting tribute to Con Murphy. And from a Kilbrittain Historical Society point, I think we're privileged to be in the position to be able to remember this hero, and you know, a huge thanks to everybody that was involved. Can I just conclude that presentation?
Can I ask a question?
Sorry, Kenneth. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. My name is Kenneth O'Sullivan from Clonakilty.
Yeah. My grandfather Patrick O'Sullivan lived in Fleshlock, or Ballinroar, as it's commonly known, the same townland. He was. I'm fascinated by the tribute, the painting that was done in Ballykindler, because my grandfather was in the IRA and all that, but he was picked up early in 21, and I believe spent most of that year until the amnesty in was it the 7th or the 6th or 7th of December. So I don't think he saw much action. I'm not sure he, again, like someone referred to earlier, he didn't speak or wouldn't speak about much of his activities in the autumn of his life when he was but I've never seen that picture, and it's quite possible he may have been involved in maybe helping to paint it and in tribute to his neighbour while he was interned in Ballykindler. So can I ask where is it? Is it on display somewhere, or who has it, or how did it come to be in the presentation tonight? Because I never heard of it or seen of it.
Sean, if I can come in there, I think Sean, it was painted by a man by the name of Ryan, I think from County Donegal, if I'm right, Brian. Okay. I have a copy of it here in the house, but I have it in front of me. And a number, I think it came through the families of the Murphy family and the Deneen family. I think it was from Margaret Deneen. I would have received a copy of it. And I think there's a name on the bottom of it, Ryan Donegal.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think he was a fellow prisoner. Maybe Brian there, you might come in.
He was, yeah. That's the best of my knowledge. Was a fellow prisoner in Ballykindler at the time. There'd have been an original copy of that, I suppose, in our house in Carrick when we were growing up. But I won't be too sure as to whether there's other copies of it or not.
Yeah.
Dan Murphy Shannon Vale may well have a copy as well.
Yeah, we have a copy as well. This is Crowley's in Kappa, yeah. So I can email it to you.
Okay, thanks.
Your email address. Yeah, I'll email that to you. Yeah, just for posterity.
I'd love to have it. Thank you.
And thank you very much to Kilbrittain Historical Society for everything tonight. It really means an awful lot. And thanks, Brian, as well, for a fabulous presentation.
Oh, thanks for a lot of the information, Kate.
Yeah, I think as you all well know at this stage, when you start to research something like this, you can get engrossed in it. It becomes very, very interesting. But I think, you know, the sharing of this information is what it's about. hopefully we're providing a platform that it can be shared in, and that the younger generation as well will take an interest on it. Can I move from there on to I think a very fitting okay, folks, so can I just, I'm going to have to come back to the poem just a little bit later, because I just need to do something here before we can come back into that. So can we move on to the second part of our presentation here, which is on Diarmuid Hurley, Common Diarmuid Hurley, which was put together by Michael Larkin and Dennis O'Brien. And following that, we can come back and have an open discussion on everything again. So, and I will come back to play that video clip as well at that stage.
Commandant Diarmuid Hurley, Officer Commanding the 4th Battalion East Cork Flying Column, Cork No. 1 Brigade. Researched and presented by Michael Larkin and Dennis O'Brien. This is a photograph of the Republican plot in the churchyard in Kilbrittain. There are 11 names on the memorial, but only 5 volunteers are buried here. These volunteers named are either native of Kilbrittain or died in Kilbrittain Parish. One of the lesser known names is that of Diarmuid Hurley, probably because his Republican activities were not in his native Kilbrittain or the surrounding areas. His name is the last one listed on the monument. He was a cousin and friend of Charlie Hurley, OC, Cork No. 3 Brigade, Old IRA. We have been able, with the help of Genealogy Ireland and the 1901 census, to establish that they were in fact second cousins. This is a photograph of Diarmuid Hurley, Charlie Hurley and Ted O'Sullivan, and was taken at about 1918. He was born on the 29th of July 1891 and baptised Jeremiah Hurley, one of 9 children born to Charles Hurley and Ellen Hurley, née Hennessy, at Barley, Kilbrittain. He attended Barley National School and got some further education in Bandon in business methods and general office work, and found employment in Cork with the Home and Colonial stores. Around this time, he started using the name Diarmuid, the Irish version of his name, and he was also known as Dermot. In 1913, he immigrated to Scotland and was employed there for 3 years. In 1916, Diarmuid returned to Ireland and took up a position with McLaughlin Brothers, wholesale and export merchants, 48 May Street, Belfast. Having been involved in Republican activities with his cousin Charlie since his early years, it was only natural that he would join the Volunteers and Sinn Féin there. By September of 1918, he feared that his life was in danger, as he had come to the notice of the RIC, and so he moved to Middleton in that month. Diarmuid found employment at the firm of T.S.&R. Coppinger at No. 1 Main Street, Middleton, as a clerk and supervisor in the yard and grain stores. It was here that he became affectionately known as the Gaffer. Shortly after his arrival, Diarmuid Hurley offered his services to the local Middleton Volunteer Company, 4th Battalion, Cork No. 1 Brigade, IRA, and quoting a member of that company, John Kelleher, in his witness statement, Hurley was of such extraordinary personality that he was almost immediately appointed captain of the Middleton Volunteers. He was a man of great driving force, anxious to get things done rather than talk about it. He set about arming the Middleton Company, collecting shotguns from friends and raiding for arms and getting some arms and ammunition from his friends in Belfast. On the night of Saturday, the 3rd of January 1920, a contingent of 30 IRA men from Cove under Mick Leahy and Middleton under Diarmuid Hurley took part in an operation to destroy the Royal Irish Constabulary Barracks in Carrigtwohill. They were supported by men from Knockraha under Martin Corrie. The East Cork men will always claim that this was the start of the War of Independence and not Salah Beg, as it was the first attack sanctioned from GHQ in Dublin. Mick Leahy from Queenstown, or Cove as it is now known, was in charge with Diarmuid Hurley second in command. As an indication of the security they employed, IRA men from Carrigtwohill were not told of the attack and not used. Corrie was told that his men would be required, but not where the attack was to take place, and was only told on Saturday morning which roads were to be roadblocked and at what time. Likewise, Hurley did not tell his men where the attack was to be until they had assembled early on Saturday evening. The Middleton men had just 12 pistols, and the men from Cove had a few rifles at that time. It wasn't much of an arsenal for attacking a highly fortified position like an RIC barracks. The Knockraha men were used to set up roadblocks on the road to Cork and the smaller roads to the north. Some of the Middleton men blocked the two roads to the east, and some of Leahy's men blocked the road at Bell Valley Bridge in case of reinforcements from Cove and Passage West. Fortunately, they also had a quantity of gelignite, which they used to blow a hole in the gable of the barracks. This was done by getting into the stables next door and setting off a charge against the wall. This is a photo of the hole through which the attackers entered. Diarmuid Hurley and Joseph Ahern led a charge into the barracks, and after some shooting they called on the RIC to surrender. The RIC were on the second floor with the volunteers on the ground floor. The RIC announced that the sergeant's wife was on the premises and asked that she be taken to safety. This was conceded to, and after she was allowed out, the battle recommenced. After some time, Hurley managed to get paraffin onto the stairs and set it alight. This convinced the defenders to surrender on the second time of asking. A large quantity of bombs, rifles, revolvers and ammunition were captured, and all the constables were released alive. It was the first RIC barracks captured and destroyed by the Irish Volunteers during the War of Independence, and boosted the morale of the Republican movement over the entire island. The only injuries on the night was Hurley himself, when he burnt his hands trying to set fire to the stairs with paraffin. This is what the barracks looked like after the attack. This is a photo of the 5 RIC men who defended the barracks on the night in question. And this is what the site looks like today. On the 4th of February 1920, just 4 weeks later, Castlemartyr RIC Barracks was captured. On the day in question, which was Fair Day in Middleton, Hurley noticed that 2 constables from Castlemartyr Barrack were on duty in Middleton. He quickly put a plan into action and arranged to capture the 2 as they cycled back to Castlemartyr that evening. When he got word that this was done, the 1 constable patrolling the street in Castlemartyr was captured. From him he learned that another was on leave, and so that was 4 constables accounted for. Hurley's plan was to have the captured constable approach the barrack and request entry, and the volunteers rush the door as it opened. But the constable would not cooperate. Even when they threatened to shoot him, he still would not betray his comrades. So Hurley approached the door with 2 volunteers either side. They stood back out of view and Diarmuid knocked. The door was opened, but was still held by a chain. Constable Lee was hit on the head with a revolver, and then shots were exchanged. The door was eventually pushed in, and the other constables surrendered. There was no further injuries on either side, and again much needed arms and ammunition was acquired. These reports were compiled from the Military Bureau statements, and it has been calculated that the maximum number of volunteers available to Hurley on the day was 24, and that includes those that were cutting trees, cutting telephone wires, and blocking roads. Interesting to note the Cork Examiner report a couple of days later, which stated that upwards of 100 members of the IRA attacked the Castlemartyr barracks. The next major engagement was the attack on Cloyne RIC barracks on the 8th of May. Mick Leahy was again in charge, as he was the senior man and a member of brigade staff, and Hurley was second in command. After suffering the loss of 2 barracks, the RIC started to fortify the others with extra staff, steel shuttering on all windows, and barbed wire at the front of the buildings. The RIC were extra vigilant at this stage. This is a slide of the building as it is today. Another view with the 2 pubs either side, which is an important part of the story. A view of the mill across the road. This is an aerial view of the site of the barrack in Cloyne. The IRA spent 2 months in planning this attack, and the main attack was conducted by Middleton and Cove companies with the assistance from all over East Cork. Again, all roads were blocked and manned with armed volunteers. East Ferry was also manned in case the military came from the forts in Cork Harbour, and of course communications were cut. The plan here was to cover the front and rear of the barrack from the mill across the road and some outbuildings at the rear. As it was 10 o'clock closing on Sunday night, 3 volunteers were ordered to enter each of the pubs beforehand and at closing time take over the pubs. 1 group succeeded in their mission, but the second was pushed out onto the street by the landlady, even when they threatened her with guns. The lads reported to Hurley, and he was livid. He marched up to the pub and demanded entry. When that was refused, he smashed the window of the pub, and that alerted the RIC, who started shooting from the barrack. Fire was returned front and rear, and the owners of both pubs were taken to safety. The volunteers then set about breaking a hole in the walls between the pubs and the barrack, which was now under attack on 4 sides. This was done with the help of gelignite, but even when the breach was made, they could not get through, as the constables were firing back through the holes. Things were made worse as the curtains in the pub caught fire. Hurley tied a few sticks of gelignite together, lit the fuse, rushed back into the smoke-filled bedroom and tossed the gelignite through the hole. After the explosion, the lads got through, but the battle overall lasted for over 2 hours before the RIC surrendered. There were many other attacks on British forces during this period, but the most audacious must surely have been Mile Bush ambush just outside of Middleton on the 5th of June 1920. The Cameron Highland Regiment was newly arrived in town, and a bicycle patrol set out to familiarise themselves with the area. They cycled to Carricktool under the guidance of a local RIC constable. Diarmuid learned of this and at a very short notice organised an ambush for their return. He had his men spread out along the road and engage in a game of road bowling. As the patrol came into view, they were allowed to pass into the middle of the group. The signal was the firing in the air of 2 shots from the only 2 revolvers they had. All 11 soldiers and the RIC men were jumped on and knocked to the ground. One soldier who was lagging behind the others came on the scene and started shooting from 200 yards. The lads grabbed a couple of their captives and advanced on the shooter behind their shield. The soldier, realizing the futility of his situation, threw down his rifle and took to the fields. 12 rifles, 1 revolver and ammunition were recovered. No one was killed or injured, and this was a very successful ambush. A passing car was commandeered, and Joseph Ahern, being the only one that could drive, was given the job of taking the captured arms to a safe dump. After putting the undamaged car back in a pre-arranged spot in Middleton, he made his way home on foot. He reached home at 4 a.m. and was sound asleep at 6 when the RIC and army raided it. He was interrogated for some time, but as there was no evidence against him, he was not arrested. It just shows who the RIC considered the usual suspects to be. At this stage of the War of Independence, Diarmuid was on the run and had a few narrow escapes. In September, he was appointed OC of the East Cork Flying Column and continued to carry the fight to the British, but with no great success until the 29th of December 1920. On that night, he organised his men along the main street of Middleton. They were hidden in doorways and laneways along the street. One must remember that there was little or no street lighting in those days, and these men must have had nerves of steel to allow a mixed patrol of RIC and Black and Tans to pass by until the signal was given to attack. The result was 5 shot, 3 fatally, 2 RIC constables and 2 Black and Tans. The column retired to a safe house and stayed there for about a week before moving to a second safe house near the village of Clonmult. On January the 1st, between 3 and 6 p.m, the British extracted their reprisals. Up to that time, it had been their custom to run amok after they were attacked, wreaking arbitrary vengeance. However, on this occasion, the houses of 7 families were selected, and the residents were given an hour to clear out valuables, but not furniture. The contents were broken up with axes, and a bomb was exploded in each premises. Later that night, the Middleton Garage and Engineering Works, now Neville's Garage, which was owned by Patrick Hinnigan, was burned to the ground. It was officially stated by the British military authorities that the reprisals were carried out because the inhabitants of the area had neglected to give information to the military and police regarding the attackers of the Black and Tans in Middleton on December 29th. The following 3 slides show the result of the reprisals carried out in Middleton. On the 20th of February 1921, the IRA suffered its greatest loss of the entire war at Clonmult, with the loss of 14 volunteers. This is a model of the farmhouse in Clonmult. This is how the site looks today. On the morning of the battle, Commandant Diarmuid Hurley, with his second in command, Captain Joseph Ahern, and the next senior officer, Captain Paddy Whelan, left early in the morning to prepare for a train ambush at Cove Junction, leaving Captain Jack O'Connell in command, with orders to vacate the farmhouse after dusk that evening and march the column to new billets at Duneen near Lara to be closer to Cove Junction. Analysis afterwards would state that it was a mistake to remain in one place for over 6 weeks, which allowed them to be noticed and betrayed. Also, no sentries were placed as they were all packing for the move next day to be near Cove Junction. What transpired was that members of the Hampshire Regiment surrounded the house unnoticed before opening fire on 2 volunteers who came out of the house to fill water bottles. The firefight ensued, and after some time 4 tried to break out the front door of the thatched cottage, led by Jack O'Connell. 2 were shot dead, 1 got back in, and O'Connell got away. He went for help some miles away, but it arrived too late. The officer in charge of the Hampshires decided to send one of his men back to Middleton, and he arrived back with a lorry load of Black and Tans. It was then decided to set fire to the thatch, the soldiers being able to easily approach the back of the house as there was no back door or windows at the back of the house. The volunteers tried to break out through the back wall, but the first man through was shot in the head, but not fatally. The fight continued until the roof started to collapse, and those that were still alive inside surrendered. Those that surrendered were lined up against the wall of the barn on the left-hand side of the picture. 2 others were still inside helping remove the wounded. The Tans shot some of those that surrendered before the officer in charge got back control. The result of this action was 12 IRA killed, 4 captured, 3 wounded and taken prisoner, one of whom was in a very bad condition, having been shot in the head. 2 Black and Tans also died, as did 6 locals in the following days who were suspected of informing. 2 of those who were captured were hung in Cork prison in April. The 3rd was also condemned to hang, but he was considered still too sick to face the hangman. He was saved by the truce of the 11th of July later that year. This is a photograph of the farmhouse after the battle. Six of the volunteers in this photograph were killed at Clonmult. The tall guy in the centre is Joseph Ahern, Vice OC of the Flying Column. He survived the War of Independence and the Civil War to die in his bed in 1951. This is a collage of photographs of those that were killed at Clonmult. Different statements to the Military Bureau between 1948 and 58 tell us that Diarmuid Hurley was distraught after the events of Clonmult on the 20th of February, but he continued to fight on with the few men that he had left. This consisted of exploding mines and sniping at the enemy, but there was no major engagement. On the 28th of May 1921, Diarmuid walked from Middleton to Carricktool to check out a report that the Tans had shot up the town the previous night and that there was no response from the local IRA. As he came to a bend in the road at Gurtacrew near Carricktool, he was surprised by a patrol of Tans. He opened fire, threw a Mills bomb and took to the fields. He managed to run over 100 yards before being shot in the back. For some reason, the Tans did not go to see who they had shot and left the scene. A local who had witnessed what happened went to Diarmuid's aid and found he was still alive. He went for help, but when he returned, Diarmuid was dead. His body was removed and buried in a tomb at Churchtown North Cemetery, and after the truce it was reinterred and he was buried in the Republican plot in Middleton. This is a memorial to Diarmuid Hurley outside of Carricktool. This is a photo of his funeral cortege when his body was transferred from Churchtown Cemetery to Middleton Republican plot during the truce. This is a picture of the Republican plot in Middleton Cemetery. Diarmuid Hurley's grave is on the extreme right of the picture. Diarmuid Hurley was unfortunate to be killed 14 days before the truce came into effect, just 2 months before his 30th birthday.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Michael and Dennis for their work in preparing that presentation, which again, to a lot of us, we would have been aware of Charlie Hurley from Kilbrittain, but we weren't maybe as up to speed about Diarmuid Hurley. And it's interesting you clarified that they are second cousins. Would anybody like to put a question out there? Or I mean, can I also just say, if people want to put any comments or questions into the chat box, we'd be delighted, because any feedback that we can get, it'd be great, because we can review that or and you know, do things a little differently if people have comments. But also, if somebody wants to ask a question, they can just put it into the chat box, and we can review it as we go along. Can I just ask you there, Michael, you mentioned that Diarmuid spent a number of years in Scotland. Have we any background to what he was doing in Scotland, or was it purely just for employment at the time?
The only information I was able to find was the fact that he was there for 3 years. So I have no information even to what city he was in or what he was doing, but I presume he was involved in some kind of Republican activity. Yeah. I'd appreciate if anyone does know any information, if they'd pass it on.
I know Sean right there that they that Diarmuid, like, he's, I suppose, officially immigrated to Scotland because there was another, I think 6 or 7 of his siblings immigrated at the same time. So out of the family of 9, there was only 3 remained in Ireland. So that there was, I think 3 went to England, and there was another one went to Florida and Canada. So I suppose it was kind of a thing at the time that he kind of had to go. But yeah, it's probably something that we didn't have a whole lot of information on. It's kind of a dark period of his life that we don't know too much about, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, you have got to the root of the family tree in that he's certainly connected to Charlie Hurley, yeah.
Oh, that's certain. We managed to look through the records, and we can trace back to, I think it was the 1830s, that they have a common grandparent, great grandparent, sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting, and both the 2 families were from Barney.
That's correct.
Which is and into Britain.
Yeah, they were in the 1901 census. The houses were, one house was known as number 1 Barley, and the other one was known as number 4 Barley. I think Dennis might have knowledge as to where the houses were exactly. I'm not too sure exactly where they were.
Well, it kind of denotes Charlie's house as being number 1, which is in the census as being the closest to Barley School. So I suppose following like that, if you follow on the road from Barley School, probably to meet, it comes down to meet the Kilbritton Bandon Road. So yeah, we don't know for sure, but we think it's probably one of the last houses that's there on that road. But I think there's a number of modern houses on that road, so it might have been demolished in the years since, you know.
Sean?
Yes,
can I say, yeah, Donegal is my name. I worked in it for a number of years, so I often heard about Diarmuid Hurley and of course Clonmalt and all of that. Like, he was an outstanding leader. I mean, he was involved in some spectacular operations during the War of Independence, in particular the one in Middleton. It was really, I mean, because he was involved in some really important attacks on the British. Like, I suppose we often, like, they call themselves the flying column, like, but I mean, even at Clonmalt, there was only around the 20 there, like, so I mean, if you compare that to the Crossbarry section was 14, so they didn't have the same logistical support that, say, the 3rd Cork Brigade had, you know. They were working in very difficult situation. East Cork is different terrain, say, to West Cork. And I suppose West Cork had a kind of a more cohesive leadership, where Diarmuid Hurley was in the 1st Cork Brigade area. Now that was composed of East Cork. You had the city, and they were kind of running their own show, because they're putting a lot of emphasis on the city. And then you had it was running down to Inchigeelagh, then the 1st Cork Brigade area. Like, so they were really brave men there in East Cork to operate there. Like, and you can imagine the trauma and the sorrow after Clonmalt. Charlie and his 2 comrades went down. They were planning the layout of an attack at Cove Junction, as our speaker said there. And when they returned later on in that evening to Clonmalt, to see the 12 bodies laid out, and they were on their own. The British had left at this stage. The 12 bodies were lying on the ground, and they went through all the 12 bodies, and they called out their names. You can imagine the sorrow and the trauma. We often hear about post-traumatic stress. They must have been suffering from post-traumatic stress after that. Like, I mean, that's a modern term now used in conflict. But they didn't have the same logistical support, and they were working in a difficult situation. Like East Cork, as I said already, is a different area, and like the 3rd Cork Brigade area, like, was from, you could say, from Kinsale out to Castletown Bay, and the flying column prior to Crossbarry, the flying column was composed of up to 104 riflemen, and here Diarmuid Hurley was trying to operate here at around the 20. Now they had a bigger number, all right, at Carricktool. So it was kind of sad there. I was just reading the military bureau statement there from a person there. I think this Keller, I think. And he said they kept on the fight, and even after Clonmalt. Of course, I mean, when something tragic happens like that, you'll also be blaming yourself. Did I do the right thing and all that? Charlie or Diarmuid was the commander, but they carried on the fight. And I read there in the Bureau of Military History that towards before the truce, that there was only 6 to 8 in that particular flying column. We'll call it a flying column. So it's just kind of sad, really, and how poor Diarmuid then was killed on his own.
Donncha, could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Hello, Donncha, could I ask you a question now, please?
Yeah, no problem.
One of the witness statements I came across mentioned the fact that the house in Clonmult was being used to collect monies
That's
from
right, yeah.
the oil loan. And after Clonmult, I feel that Diarmuid was unfairly blamed for Clonmult because he stayed there for 6 weeks. But I came across one witness statement that stated he was ordered to stay there for 6 weeks because they were collecting money for the Doyle loan. So he wasn't responsible for staying there for 6 weeks.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, yeah, because as I said already, like the 1st Cork Brigade, like they were taking orders really from the city area. The city was kind of directing them what to do. And Diarmuid Hurley's flying column, if you'll call it a flying column, there would be just a big section really. I mean, so I would agree with you there, yeah. I think he has been unfairly treated in that respect. I think he was an outstanding, one of our greatest leaders, like really, you know, because with the tools he had available he was tough in his Cork, like, and they were actually well in the field, like before many other areas, like they're in the field in 1920, early 1920, 1919 there. So I mean, he was. I think I'd agree with you there, yeah. I think he has been unfairly treated there, yeah. And I think, but see, the 3rd Cork Brigade seemed to have a better. Tom Barry wasn't telling anybody. He wasn't telling anybody above in Dublin or anywhere else like that if there was going to some operation was happening. Whereas the Diarmuid Hurley's flying column was kind of they were under the city, kind of Sean Haggerty, and they were kind of under their command. Like, so that was a dangerous thing to be operating. There was going to be a breakdown in kind of in security and things like that when they were kind of being kind of directed by the city, you know.
Right.
That's what I felt anyhow, I think. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Donncha. Anybody else like to come in on a comment?
Just one comment, Sean, if I may. I think the monument in Clonmult, you know, the fact that it's inside the private farm and that the O'Sullivan family who purchased the farm had been very much responsible for and to the forefront in keeping that monument in the condition it's in today and in welcoming visitors. And I think there's fierce credit due to that family. You know, I think it's a very sad sight when one visits it. But the very fact that it is kept in the condition it is in is a testament to the O'Sullivan family. Thanks, Sean.
John, just an interesting thing there about the Castlemartyr RIC barracks. That Constable Lee was injured. No, I suppose you would kind of blame Hurley for that, but Hurley went long afterwards and he got a doctor and a priest to tend to the injured constable. So that kind of showed, you know, a different side to the man than just, you know, you want this. You know, he was a fearless man and all that, but he definitely showed a bit of mercy and humanitarian about him, I'd say. And again, when volunteer Liam Heffernan was killed, Diarmuid Hurley was one of the men there with him. And volunteer Heffernan was an only son, and his father was disabled. And like most fathers back then, it was a dreadful loss to him. And just before Diarmuid died, before he was killed, it's believed that he gave his last £20 sum that he had in his pocket to the father. I suppose possibly he felt, you know, maybe some bit of guilt in the fact that he was leading volunteer Heffernan when he was killed. So, you know, it kind of shows a different side to the man. And, you know, from what I've read of him, he did seem like a thoroughly decent, you know, volunteer. So, you know, Daniel Cashman was another volunteer who said that he was a very strict disciplinarian, especially as regards drink, and that when planning an attack on the enemy, he never worried about the odds against them, and he always believed that a surprise attack with inferior forces would sway the balance in his favor. So he definitely didn't lack for confidence in his abilities as a leader. You know.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, yeah, I mean, I suppose like
Hurley that.
Yes, Sean, please, yeah.
I was going to say, Hurley, that they were unfortunate that they were they stayed there too long, and they were about to leave it, as you know, within hours of they being captured, because there was a spy involved as well that gave them away. But it was, they were there too long. The two of the men that had been on the watch went into the house thinking that everything was okay. And of course, they were taken by surprise. Then that was unfortunate as well. But they were obviously too long there. They should have left it earlier, days earlier than what they did. Just as a matter of interest, I think it was 2001, it's about 20 years ago, I spoke at Carrigogna, just to the north of Middleton, on Diarmuid Hurley, and so on. And there was a commemoration there. I had the honour of speaking there. And
there's a monument there, Sean.
Led me on to Kilcumper later that month. But as has been already said, Diarmuid Hurley was a great man, a great leader, great courage, and gave great leadership. Was unfortunate. And then, of course, it was unfortunate as well that Diarmuid and a couple of his leading men were on the Cove Junction, checking out a situation for an ambush. They were going to ambush a train at Cove Junction. They were, as been pointed out, they were away when the attack came on the house in Clonmalt. That was unfortunate as well. If Hurley and the others had been there, maybe they could have averted it, or they'd have been on the watch. What amazes me, though, that it's extraordinary, the same happened at Crystal, that they didn't keep up the watch. That would have been very, very important, because many of them were very young. They probably were inexperienced as well. But having people on watch was vital, and they paid a huge price for not having it. It was a tragic end for them, wasn't it, at Clonmalt?
One of the things I came across, Sean, in my research is that one of those killed in Clonmalt was only 16 years of age.
Yeah.
Only 16.
So
yeah, very young.
Looking at the others, they weren't much older.
Yeah, very genuine young men. It was a huge loss, of course, to their families and to the organisation. It was a major blow to the organisation and to their families to lose them at a young age like that. And however, the war. Also, with regard to Con Murphy was unfortunate as well, because he was killed on the 11th of May, 1921, exactly 2 months to the day before the truce. So if the truce had been earlier, he'd have been saved as well. I think he was at the attack on Bandon Barracks with Daniel O'Reilly, where Daniel O'Reilly from Granassick was killed. Con Murphy was involved in that attack as well in Bandon Barracks, because he survived that. He was a huge loss as well, a tragic loss to the West Cork column and the organisation in general. He was a huge loss as well. So it just strikes me, and I was looking the other day at all the different events, all the different ambushes that place and all that. The country is full of them. When you travel the roads, whether it is East Cork, West Cork, it could be Kerry, it could be Limerick, it could be Tipperary. The country is full of locations where young men, and supported by Cumnaman, lost their lives. Tragic, and it brings home to all of us, I suppose, the ferocity of the War of Independence, and also how the flying columns and how the IRA could have survived against the British, who were very well armed and who had greater manpower and ammunition and armaments than the volunteers. And it's extraordinary in many ways how we, so many could have survived, and we could have come out of it as well as we did. But as I've said before, there was one major difference between the Irish side and the British side. The Irish volunteers were 100% committed to the cause that they were in, and it was a just cause to free Ireland from British rule. And that goes back a long time to Wolfe Tone and beyond. the British were paid people. They were paid, but they were paid officials, paid soldiers, if you like, and they had no understanding of Ireland and all that. And of course, the people that were in charge of them, especially the back and tanks and auxiliaries, they ran amok. They were out of control, and eventually the British came to their senses and they called a truce. So the whole story is a very tragic one, and the loss of life was extensive.
Okay, Sean, thank you for that.
Awesome.
Can we just, I mean, as so many speakers have said already, it's the scale of the Crown forces against such a small grouping was hard to comprehend. And when you look at both Con Murphy and Diarmuid Hurley, both the two were shot in the back almost on their own, with the exception of you know, they were really singled out, I suppose, when they were shot, which was unfortunate. Just one other comment there on the chat box, and I think Dennis, you might have touched on it. There obviously is no house numbers in the town lands, and one individual is asking here, where do we get the numbering system? Do I take it as something that was used by the say enumerators at the time, or those mapping at the time?
Yeah, I might have come in there, but it was, they had to register for the outbuildings and the barns and that kind of thing. And I think it gave the list, isn't that right, Michael? It gave it the number on the road.
Yeah, I'd say it was up to the enumerator that went around and took the names in the different farms to make some kind of a system himself. He just seems to go onto a road and take house number 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Okay, anybody else like to come in? Okay, I'm going to go back a little now, folks, to the poem written by Clara Crowley, because I didn't, the screen didn't share the last time, but I think it summarizes both the two deaths very well, even though it's written in the context of West Cork and Con Murphy. But just bear with me for a second, please, while we go back into that, please.
Hi everyone. Ignore my voice, I'm a bit hoarse. But I suppose we never got to meet Con Murphy, but we have met the Ireland that he died to give us. So this is a poem that I wrote to honour Con Murphy, and I'd like to read it as a tribute to my granny, Joan Crowley ní Deneen, who Con Murphy would have been an uncle to. So it's called Brothers of War. Let us remember. Hi everyone. Ignore my voice, I'm a bit hoarse. But I suppose we never got to meet Con Murphy, but we have met the Ireland that he died to give us. So this is a poem that I wrote to honour Con Murphy, and I'd like to read it as a tribute to my granny, Joan Crowley ní Deneen, who Con Murphy would have been an uncle to. So it's called Brothers of War. Let us remember our boys from West Cork, who fought in the fields with their hurls and pitchforks. These men, these heroes, they had no names, they had no recognition, claimed no fame. The message, it came from the capital city, the British to be driven out, to take no pity. Loyal Irish men and women answered the cause. This is war, they were told. There are no rules and no laws. How could one man say he owns the land when it is not rightfully his? We must make a stand for this. This is our time to stand up and fight, to reclaim what is ours, to make things right. British soldiers, artilleries, the black and tans, when marching through our streets, had few fans. They stood there with their tanks and their guns to scare the Irish people, to make them run. But our men fought back with pride in their eyes, for in this point in history, a nation would rise. Above any other, they wanted to be free, to become a republic, to reclaim their dignity. They fought in Ballinascarthy, Clon and Argadine. As the flowers around them withered, the shamrock grew green. In defeat they would rise, and in victory stand tall, for this is what they were born for, to answer Ireland's call. They did not sell out, but stayed silent and lie. They were willing to suffer, to be killed and die, to be able to call this country their own, for it to be independent, and it be written in stone. So let us remember the boys from West Cork, who fought in the fields with their hurls and pitchforks. They all fought together, and never stood alone. We salute those brave soldiers who saved Ireland. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much to everybody. Thank you, Clara. I'm not sure the volume may not have come through right in that clip, but we will be posting it to the Kilbrittain Historical website tomorrow evening, so you will be able to log back on and to see that. So again, I'd like to thank everybody very much for participating. Thanks to the Murphy family, and particularly Brian for your works, to Michael and Dennis for your works on
Could I interrupt there, Sean, please?
Michael, yeah.
It's just that I saw a chat line come up and from Thomas Ellis, and I noticed Thomas is online there at the moment, and I'm wondering, that is one of the houses we suspected, but we didn't say that it was Ellis's house. I wondered, does the Ellis family have any knowledge or any that the history that it was a Hurley house?
Hi, Michael. Yes, there was actually two families of Hurleys living in the house before my grandfather lived there. I'm not saying Diarmuid lived there, but certainly the two houses are within touching distance of each other, and they're lived in currently, so it probably wouldn't be fair to name the families that live there now, you know.
Right. We were looking at the houses, and there's a lot of modern houses along that road, but the older houses, we thought that your house might be number 4 and be Diarmuid's house. Is that possible?
It's very possible, yeah.
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 Grand, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So I think, you know, without further ado, we'll conclude the evening. As I say, we'll have everything up on the Kilbrittain Historical website for the recording version, so people can go back onto that after tomorrow evening to view. And again, as I'd again like to thank everybody for participating. We will be hosting maybe a couple of outdoor events over the next coming months, and we'll send the details of those out to you as it goes along. And again, if anybody would like to join the society, you can also do that through the historical through our website. There's a facility to pay online, and it's just €20 per an individual or 25 for the year. So just you'll be able to keep abreast with what we're doing as we go along to the year. We're hoping to run 2 or 3 outdoor events during the summer once we'll be all allowed out, and then maybe to come back to Zoom presentations again towards the end of the year. But if anybody has any comments or otherwise, put them in the chat box and we'll take some guidance from them. So again, thank you very much to everybody for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
John.
To the moment.